All right, Kate, take it away. Let's start with introductions.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Very excited to have you all here again. Very excited tonight because I don't have to do all the talking, which is the best part. But aside from our panelists, this is also really about you guys joining in, right? Our goal is to help you, but you guys are the ones out there in the trenches doing the hard work. So as we move through the webinar, bring us your ideas. Somebody says, can we raise our hand? Yes, you can raise your hand and we will call on you. We want your ideas. We want your things that haven't worked, your things that have worked, along with our own. The goal is to present as many ideas as possible here, along with some educational opportunities, right? So that hopefully you guys can find some resources that will help you. So real fast with introductions, very, very excited tonight to have joining me my co-host Linda Campbell and Megan Skeleton. Linda is actually a fellow BTS behavior like myself. She's also a CPD-TKA and a Fear-Free Level 3. And she has actually been working in the rescue world for over 30 years now at the Humane Society of Missouri, where she is currently the shelter animal behavior manager. So lots of experience and knowledge here. Very excited to have her on board. And then our other co-host joining us tonight is Megan Skeleton, who is a fellow GoodPup trainer and is also a part of our GoodPup behavior team as well. And Megan is a CCUI, or a Certified Control Unleashed instructor. If you guys aren't familiar, that's a curriculum created by Leslie McDevitt, who is really one of the gurus on reactivity behavior. So very excited to have her here as well. And most of you hopefully know me by now, but if you don't, I'm head of training and run our behavior team here at GoodPup, and very excited to be presenting this today. So let's go ahead and get started with our leash reactivity at the other end of the leash. So tonight for our agenda, we're going to start with just really defining what leash reactivity is, making sure everybody's on the same page with that, because that's going to influence the next big parts of our webinar, which are going to be really how to address it. We're going to talk about how to address it in the rescues and the shelters, and then also potentially a little bit on how to address it outside of, specifically referring to that transition from the shelter to the home environment. And then we'll wrap up with talking about how we don't want to address leash reactivity. So I'm going to go ahead and start with what leash reactivity is. Most of you are probably very familiar with what it is. You've probably seen it. This is a terrific picture of a dog displaying some reactivity on leash, right? But when we define reactivity, leash reactivity specifically is when we see dogs overreact, so barking, lunging, growling, jumping. There can be a variety of behaviors, but they're overreacting to a stimulus, generally a stimulus that bothers them in some way, while they are specifically on a leash, right? So on our next slide, you'll see where we actually define what leash reactivity is. And the reason it's important that we understand what leash reactivity is because most leash reactivity, what we see, that barking, lunging, growling, and jumping, is a secondary response to that dog feeling frustrated or fearful. Some people think it's protection, but it's very rarely related to protection. It can be, but almost always it has to do with frustration and fear. And the reason that's important is because those are emotions, right? And if my reactivity is a response to my emotion, I'm not going to get rid of my reactivity unless I address my emotion first. So our first goal has to be how we can address that emotion inside the rescue, sending our dogs home to their homes, anywhere they're going to be going on a leash. And that's pretty hard, right? And if we don't address that emotion, then what's going to happen over time, where our reactivity is related to those emotions, that reactivity, it just becomes paired to the leash. And then I don't actually need fear. I don't even need frustration. I just need the leash to get the behavior. And that's what we don't want to have happen, right? So thinking about this a little bit from a dog's perspective, and then I'm going to ask my co-host to jump in here too. The leash really, if you think about it from dog, it kind of serves like a cage in a way, right? Dogs aren't allowed to address situations as they might normally address the situation if they weren't on a leash, right? And so their response is something to something external in their environment. It can be a dog, it can be a noise, it can be people. It can be one thing, or it can be very general. It can be to a lot of different things, right? But what we want to do is really focus on how we can address the emotion, how we can minimize that emotion, so then we can talk about teaching an alternative or more appropriate behavior. So before we dive into the guts of this webinar, I just want to quickly see, Linda, Megan, do you guys have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think you covered it really pretty well, very concisely, much more than I would probably. So, yes.
That's my goal, right? I really work hard to just break things down so everybody understands it across the board. All right, so now,
I think you did it really well. The only thing that I would say is that you want to keep in mind that the dog's not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time.
Yes.
That's something I try to come back to again and again when I'm talking about leash reactivity, because my dog is struggling. I may have emotions based on that, but my dog is having a hard time.
Yeah, they're stressed.
And I think the other thing is they pick up through the leash their owner's own emotions.
Absolutely.
Really important, because if you can't stay calm and controlled, the animal just increases its arousal and anxiety level, because if the owner doesn't know what's going on, it really impacts the dog too.
Yeah, I like to say the intensity of the behavior increases. And for me personally, when I'm training with people, that's really where we run into problems, right? Because then when the intensity increases, now I've just got all kinds of associations being made. So great, thank you. So diving into the guts of this, and we're gonna, of course, we want everybody else to dive in and give ideas too, but we're gonna start with talking about addressing leash reactivity. So the other end of the leash, right? On site, in your rescues, in your shelter. We're gonna look at some prevention opportunities, some management opportunities, and training. And we would love to hear from you guys while we're chit-chatting about this as well. So starting with prevention, you guys can see a couple big ones here that we've put on screen. You know, preventing is really, it's giving us an opportunity to prevent, right? To not allow, not the behavior, to not allow the emotion to get in the way as much as possible, right? That's the idea of prevention. So I know when talking to our rescue liaison at GoodPup, you know, one of the first things she said, and I thought too, was foster homes. What a great resource, right? To get a dog that we know or we've identified has reactivity with leash concerns out quickly. Not that they're not going to have them there, but the rescue environment, right? I know for many of you, I assume most of you struggle, right? This is an environment where dogs are constantly on a leash and probably generally constantly surrounded by stimuli that trigger that reactivity. But I know foster homes can be a problem, I would imagine, right, Linda? Especially now, today.
It's difficult in foster homes sometimes, because you're working with a group of people just like your everyday owners who come in, and they require a lot of training. And foster parents are also, for us, foster parents assume responsibility for a lot of different type of animals. So it's hard at times to be able to train them exactly in whatever animal they're going to be working with. So it's really specific when you come to leash reactivity, because as I said, the foster parents feel they're a failure sometimes. The dog is barking, the dog is lunging, it's embarrassing to them. And so, yeah, fostering is a great tool as long as you provide the foster parents with the resources they need.
Yeah.
That is support and training, things like that. In fact, we're having a foster orientation downstairs right now, so as we speak. So we are in the process of doing that more.
Good.
So, yeah.
And I know I've got some ideas too, things that I thought of from when I used to work at a rescue years ago that would be simple, right? Because our goal is efficient, simple to rescue. I know you guys are short-staffed and everybody's doing a gazillion things, right? So figuring out those things that can help the dog and help our fosters and or adopters, right, succeed, but making things, not having that have to be more work on our employees as well, right? Lisa, is there anyone I just want you to let me know or jump in if we have any hands raised.
I
that-
absolutely will. You don't have to worry about that. Lori just said she is someone that foster dogs and they appreciate training opportunities like this one. So that is another thing I'll say is that, you know, as we have a lot of members of the shelter community here on the call from rescues and shelters, these types of webinars are not just for you guys. You can share them with your fosters. We want everyone to come. These are not just for people working in shelters or rescues. So use these. And again, even the recordings as ways to a resource for your fosters and adopters. I will also say that one of the things that we are starting to do at GoodPup, and this is not a sales pitch, but we do have scholarships now available to our rescue and shelter partners, which sends that they're able to purchase and send home with their fosters. So if you have a foster who really wants to help but is nervous, and you know a dog is kind of maybe a dog that is showing some leash reactivity, so you want them to have some extra support, you can talk to anyone at GoodPup about that opportunity, because it's a way for you to send them home with prepaid training. And I think that we've seen some success with that because that's the thing. This is what we hear you guys, and we want to provide tools for you to use for your shelters.
Yeah, and that actually, oh, I'm sorry. I saw that comment and I was saying that leads us right really into that surrender prevention concept, right? Is offering fosters and really even owners, right? Before the dog's ever there, ways to try to prevent them from coming into the shelter.
Yeah, 100%. I'm reading through some of the comments now. Tracy says her dog's very reactive towards other dogs when walking on leash, but when we bring her to the groomer, she's quiet and even got a gold star as one of their best. So is it possible that dogs have different reactions on leash in different environments?
Yes, absolutely. I see Megan shaking her head extensively. Yeah, so that's a very common thing. I hear people say, oh, if I let my dog off at the dog park, they're fine. But when I put them on a leash, I can't walk by another dog. And again, it really, remember I said it comes down to the dog, the frustration of not being able to get to something and or the fear of not being able to get away from something, right? They're confined, they're stuck on a leash, and they don't have those emotions when they're off leash. So when it becomes connected to the leash, some dogs actually very quickly distinguish, oh, I'm not on the leash. And we remove the emotion, I don't have the behavior. Right. So yes.
We do have one question here before we go forward. It says from Lynn, we often see dogs adopted or fostered leaving the shelter with no observable leash reactivity, but they come back for training after a few weeks in a new home with beginnings of serious leash reactivity. We think it is because they're exposed to too much newness too quickly. They don't have the opportunity to develop the security of a routine yet. Any thoughts?
Linda, do you want to add to that? I have some thoughts that I know are further down another slide, but it was one of my ideas I wanted to put out there for the rescues.
Well, we do see it sometimes. Most of the time, because we have a large number of animals here, we will see the leash reactivity while we're here in the shelter. So we already have an idea of how that animal is going to behave. We don't have it happen. We tend to know when we send recommendations for an animal, we do recommend them to GoodPup because we obviously can't follow up with everybody. But we do send a list of things that they should or should not consider trying to do with these animals at the beginning, which is walking them at odd times of the day when they're not around a lot of other animals. We have had people that have taken their dogs to walk on walks at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they've gone to the church parking lot and just walked around the parking lot to get the exercise in. So not placing them in that position so they don't establish that habit, because once they establish the behavior, that's when it really becomes troublesome, because most people don't know how to deal with it. So, I mean, that's one of my biggest things is don't put the animal in the position that he could develop that behavior. And you're right, taking him places where he's already flooded with all sorts of experiences that he's not really ready for. You know, we deal with a lot of rescue dogs, and that's been a big problem with them, a big challenge with them. So, I mean, for us, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I love the idea of the list. And in fact, you guys will see further down that I thought and I think, and forgive me if I forget the name of who brought that up, but I think that is a very nicely observed or identified concern, right? Like you didn't see it in the shelter, and you might want to consider maybe how your rescue is set up, that it doesn't necessarily promote, or if anything, it prevents you guys from identifying that reactivity, which is great, right? But then you don't know when they go out. So setting them up for success when they go as much as possible, even if you necessarily haven't identified reactivity, but kind of that 3-3 rule, 3-3-3 rule that everybody runs by in the rescue groups, that I know isn't, scientific rule, but that adjustment time frame, giving that dog time to adjust. And one of the things that I think could be very impactful for owners is helping them or letting them know the dog's schedule, the routine. What's the setup? What do they do? Keeping that structure and maintaining that structure for those first 3 weeks while they're getting to know that dog, and really giving owners, I find, at least when I talk to owners, not putting the responsibility of it on them, or really giving them that freedom to not have to take the dog out immediately, right? To let them know that it's okay to just be in your house, in your yard, and get to know this dog for a little bit. So great question. I know somebody else has another question here. I'm going to let Lisa look at that. I did want to touch on enrichment. We just did an enrichment webinar, which you guys all have access to. And the enrichment webinar has some great ideas that can be used in the rescue. Because again, if I can keep my dogs busy physically and mentally, I'm helping prevent some of those emotions, at least certainly influencing the intensity of those emotions, which could actually help decrease the risk of reactivity on the leash too. So another easy one at times, with ideas with enrichment to help within the rescue environment. So Lisa, if you'll go ahead and move to the next slide, I want to talk back because I don't want to get stuck here, but I know somebody sent a question through. I was kind of reading it. I wanted to.
Yeah, I think there's a few questions that we should probably address before we move on to the next slide. And someone did raise their hand. I wasn't able to call on them as quickly because Kate was talking, but if you wanted to raise your hand again, I'd be happy to allow you to speak to the panel. But let's go through the questions and then we can move on as well. The first one is, my dog likes to play tug with the leash. Is this considered reactive? If I tell her no, she stops, but I don't know what emotions she's trying to show me by tugging the leash, or is she just playing? Which is a great question because my puppy tugs on the leash and I don't know either.
I know. I want to get Miss Megan unmuted because I know she's probably got a lot of thoughts about some of these. I want Megan to chime in here, but I will tell you that yes, you can see that as a form of reactivity, 100%, absolutely. But I will generally say that 9 times out of 10, that is a play. And what I see it as is a signal that my dog's aroused, and I would probably want to interrupt it or redirect it so it doesn't increase, that arousal doesn't continue to escalate, and I end up in a state of frustration. Yeah. Megan, chime in, please.
Yeah, so leash tugging is definitely a sign of arousal. It also can be used to help decrease frustration for dogs. Yes. Tugging, anything they do with their mouths, biting, barking, yelling, tugging, all of those things can help to reduce it. But it's not always a good one to use when your dog is reactive or possibly reactive, because it tends to send the arousal sky high. If I have a dog that does this, and I don't think it was mentioned earlier, but I have 25 years of agility experience, and I'm an agility judge in several organizations. And I actually teach leash tugging to all of my dogs and all of my students' dogs, because it is a toy I can take into the ring with me to compete. But if you have a dog that's already leash tugging, I would put a rule structure on it. We only tug when we're asked to tug, and we drop the minute we're asked to drop. And then it can be used to get your dog to focus away from things that they may be focused on, to help reduce the risk of having a reaction. But it is almost always an arousal or a joy sign.
Interesting. Okay. So you would say to teach them how to tug on, like, as like a cue.
As a cue, I teach you get it, and you present the leash, and we tug, 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 and then I say drop it, and I expect you to spit it out and continue to walk. And since this person's dog is dropping it when she asks them to, I would just teach her a cue of when it's appropriate. And so if my dog notices something and I need them to focus on me, I can use that to get them away from something. I also use it a lot as a reward for my dogs. So we're in a hard situation and my dog manages to do a sit and a touch and I don't have a treat. I have a leash I can hug. And it can reduce a little bit of the anxiety for my dog. But it really varies depending on the breed of the dog and the temperament of the dog.
Yeah, the individual dog,
Yeah.
That's great.
I did see that other question pop up on the 333, Lisa, and I wanted to just thank Ben for answering it.
Yes, thank you, Ben. You jumped in sooner. There was one other question above that though, because you answered it perfectly, Ben. So Karen, I hope that answers your question. We can dig in on that more if you have additional questions. But Libby said, my dog has been attacked several times while on leash, so now has developed a fear when passing other dogs when we're walking. That sounds legitimate.
Yeah, that is reactivity to a T. And I hate that that's happened to your dog. And unfortunately, it doesn't even take 3 times. It can just take 1 time for a dog. That's it, 1 time. And then we're spiraling down a road. So again, I think it was Libby, right? How we want to address that or work on that, right, is we have to address the fear part first. And we're going to get into some of the training techniques. In fact, that's one of the reasons I really wanted Megan here. So Lisa, let's jump to that next slide so we can start to get into the training area. And Libby, I think we'll answer some of those questions for you. Real fast on that picture, just so everybody knows, this is a terrific picture that Linda contributed tonight. This is from the Humane Society of Missouri. And you guys can see, because we're about to talk about some management strategies here, some of the things they've done to minimize visually dogs looking at each other. And again, if I don't have that visual stimulus in front of me, it's going to decrease my arousal, decrease my risk of reactivity. So this is a really nice setup that they've done here. And then they've planted these wonderful, beautiful plants in the middle as well to prevent
They usually look much better. We've just been with COVID, we've had some challenges with keeping the plants looking nice, but yeah, it serves a great purpose.
Beautiful shot.
People walk in, they don't feel like they're necessarily in a shelter. And if you're walking a dog down one side and the dogs are on the other side of their run, the dogs on the other side don't see that dog, and it just really helps create a much smoother path to walk them.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
It's great. So if you look at it from a management perspective, so talking about management, our next slide, right? One of the things we can do in the rescue environment is create some visual barriers, right? So the dogs can't see the stimulus if they're reactive to dogs and or people. Some dogs are, reactive to people, right across from them, right beside them. And that makes a huge, it's gonna be very helpful. Linda, do you guys have a way when I know that's a great picture as far as how to walk the dogs. Some of the ideas I've given to people is actually mobile barriers for people to use that can be kept at either end of the entrance or exit of a kennel run, where staff can actually carry it. I had somebody actually make PVC pipe, and it was just literally like a square little pick it up and carry. Have you guys ever done anything like that or used anything like that as well?
We have in some of our other areas where we don't have the option of this. This is our public area. In the back where we hold animals a little bit more, we actually do some of that type of thing. We don't necessarily have PVC, but we do have some of the lighter plastics that we do. We've also, if you didn't notice, we have glass fronts in our kennel, which have some distinct disadvantages in some instances, because for the dogs, I think sometimes the bars, when you have the bars in the kennel, give them a visual, whereas with the glass, there's nothing there. So they're feeling frustrated because they can't reach whatever's on the other side of the glass. And they have actually, in some of our kennels where we have some that you don't see in this picture, but they actually have sort of a little bit of a film over the bottom half of the glass. And it's something that's easily removed and put back in if you need to. And that's something else in this situation, so that you can prevent the dogs that are reactive on the inside of the kennels from seeing the dogs walking by. And we do front and back sides. So we have, and that just goes to your next one, the walking paths, things like that. In the
Yeah,
morning,
and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I know one of the rescues I worked at, because of the way that dogs came in and out, we had enter-only doors and exit-only doors to prevent any potential, collisions with dogs. As well as we actually designated the level of walking experience that was required to walk certain dogs, right? So some volunteers were just not, they had to take a specific class and or demonstrate they had the skill set to walk certain levels of dogs as well.
Yes, we have Green Star, Yellow Star, and Red Star volunteers that are dog walkers. And we don't have a lot of Green Star dogs because most of them in the shelter, even if they were Green Star, they go up a little bit more with the stress and the arousal that's in the shelter. But we also have guillotine doors where in the mornings when they're cleaning, the dogs are on the other side. And so the dog walkers can actually go to the side where the dogs aren't and pull the dogs out and walk them out. So they're not going past any of the others. We have walking routes that we have in there. So there's one way in, one way out. We have windows in all our big doors so that before a volunteer walks into an area, they can see if there's a dog out or not. It was a pretty easy fix for that one. And it just enables them to see if there's a dog that's out of the kennel or someone's getting a dog in or out. We do have some guidelines, only one dog out at a time, so that we don't have two dogs meeting in the hallway in the middle or something.
That sounds great. And Ben said that at his rescues, they also do the volunteer levels. That sounds like something that if you guys are struggling on the calls, if you have some dog walkers or volunteers who have more problems than others, doing a rating system so that you're not mismatching dogs is important. And also, it sounds like visual barriers in a variety of different ways should be incorporated. And I do love the idea of like training your staff and having signs and stuff so they know how to avoid meeting other dogs, and preventing the problem altogether. I am cognizant of time, Kate, so we are over the halfway point. So let's keep moving on.
Yeah, a couple of quick things, and then we're going to dive a little bit into some easy training things to do at the rescues. Schedule, Linda kind of touched on this, right? Knowing what's happening when, right? Like specific cleaning times when people can go in and get dogs and avoid those scenarios if they're seeing them. Nap times, I think we talk a lot about enrichment, adding this and doing that and keeping our dogs' brains busy, but it's just as important to have an off switch, right? And that would be something very important to go over as far as routine wise with a potential adopter as well, right? Like, here's what we do, here's the role, at such and such time they take a nap. Maintaining that, you're actually influencing the dog, not just their cycle and their schedule in general, but their internal rhythm, right? So sending them to a home and having people know that. I was actually just having a conversation with Lisa today about this with her new puppy. You are in a way influencing the arousal level of the brain by setting up those schedules and routines and maintaining that when they go to homes. And that can be very impactful when you have a reactive dog as well. And then of course, another thing which we won't get into a ton here, right? But medication, certainly we don't want, as Megan had said earlier, these dogs in a constant state of stress, and that's something to consider. And if they are, and if we are unable to provide them what they need, that is something that we should certainly put on the table and consider. Talking to their vet, if you have a vet that works with you or a vet on site. But let's talk about the training a little bit on site. So, and I know this is Megan's area of specialty, and I'm sure Linda will chime in too, because she's been doing it forever. These were just some simple things that I put in here, and I'm going to really kind of let Megan and Linda run with this. But teaching staff and volunteers how to do hand muzzles is a great resource. It's literally a handful of whatever treat and or cheese whiz, but it's stuffed over the dog's nose just like this as you walk them by the kennel quickly, right? There's all kinds of games we can play. Again, I'll let Megan talk about that. Educating staff on what an emergency U-turn is, and then impulse control exercises, which again is really us helping keep these dogs' brains at a lower level of arousal. So Megan, I'm going to have you jump in, and
Okay.
Linda, don't hesitate to jump in as well. But I'm going to let you guys run with this a little bit.
Okay. And I call hand muzzles treat magnets instead, but I think it's the same concept. But I think that one's pretty easy, but I really want to talk more about the pattern games. And for me, there are 3 main pattern games that I think are really vital to get dogs in and out past other dogs and to just reduce reactivity in general. These were all developed by Leslie McDivitt. They're all in the Control and Leash books, and I highly recommend her most recent book, which is Control and Leash Reactive to Relaxed. Super, super good read. So the first one I want to talk about is Look at That, which is basically letting the dog point out what the trigger is in their environment for them. So anything the dog notices, whether it's a person, whether it's a dog, whether it's something on the ground, it doesn't matter what it is, but the second the dog looks away from the handler, I want to mark that look with yes and reward the dog for coming back to me. So I get this pattern where my dog looks away and then comes right back, looks away and comes right back. And this is something that I want to do when I enter a space with a dog, when I get a dog out of a kennel, when I am coaching a new owner on how to leave a house with their dog, letting the dog point out the things that they've noticed in the environment. And what we find is that once we kind of say to the dog, yeah, that thing is there, you can look at it, and the dog comes back to us. We do that 3 or 4 times and the dogs are like, okay, and they're able to deal a little bit more. If they're not able to deal, if they look and you get a hard stare, or they're barking, or they continue to be focused, they are above threshold and too close, whatever the trigger is. So that can be hard in a kennel environment, and some of the other games that I'm about to get into will help. But really giving the dog a chance to say, hey, there's a dog there and it's looking at me, and letting them kind of move through that. It can be a hard one to wrap our minds around, because we do so much rewarding our dogs for looking at us. And here, the markable moment, the moment where I actually say, yes, that is what I want, is the moment my dog looks away from me towards whatever the trigger is. So that, I think, is the hardest thing for most of us to kind of process. I'm paying my dog for looking away, but letting them point it out helps to calm them quite a bit. The biggest, yes, bat training does that as well. Absolutely. The biggest thing that I think helps people get dogs past things that they may react to is a game called 1, 2, 3. And Leslie refers to it as 1, 2, 3 cookie. It is one of my favorite games. And there was actually a panel at the Lemonade Conference this past weekend where they talked about using this particular game for nail trimming. So there's many applications for this particular game, but in its core, it's a walking game. And I start by teaching the dog, I start by teaching them the number 3. So I say 3 and I feed, and I do that 5 or 6 times until when I say the number 3, my dog is like, yes, hello, I like that number. And then I start to walk and count, and I count 1, 2, 3, and on 3, I feed. And once the dog understands this pattern, it can be used to walk them past just about anything that they are concerned about. So you can use it walking out of a kennel to go for a walk, coming back into a kennel, passing another dog. It just helps the dogs to have a pattern and a framework in which to move. When I'm doing this, I can feed from my hand, but I think it's actually more ideal to feed from the ground rather than from your hand, because there is something magic about having the dog, you're walking 1, 2, 3, you put the treat on the ground for 3, the dog is eating the treat and then coming straight back up to you and focusing on you. And that little moment where they go from the ground, which we know is sniffing, is enrichment, can help to calm them, to looking back up and focusing on you, can help them really get past a lot of things. So you can definitely feed from your hand, and depending on the environment, sometimes you have to, but it makes a big difference if you can drop on the ground. The other thing, and the other reason I teach 1, 2, 3 is that I can elongate it or compress it based on my needs. So if I am trying to get a dog past a barking gauntlet of other dogs into their kennel, my counting can be very rapid. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. There's not much going on. My counting may take 5 minutes. It may be 1, not much happens, and then 2, and then 3, or just disappear completely. You find that when you teach this game to dogs, that the second you start to count, even if the dog is starting to have a little bit of a moment and starting to be anxious about something or fearful about something, that it breaks that moment and they turn right back into the handler. And it's the beginnings of my leash walking, but it makes a huge difference in getting the dogs past
This
things.
is a new game I've been playing with some of my clients, Megan, and what I've noticed, aside from the dogs, this is an easy concept for owners.
Absolutely.
And that's
Yep.
one of the reasons it works so well.
Yeah,
Because all the owner has to do is count.
exactly. And some of them feel weird about counting. I do get that, where they're like, I can't count out loud. And I'm like, you're training a dog. You are going to look like an idiot. It is what happens. But and I've had some that will count in French because they don't want, whatever. It's something repetitive, but it really helps to relax the owner. It's hard to be tense when you're just counting 1, 2, 3, right? It's just, it kind of comes out. It sounds relatively happy. And when you see the dog go, oh yeah, I know what to do. Let me move through. It makes such a big difference.
Did you see that question too on there? I'm sorry.
I did not.
Would it be okay? Yeah, it's about the 3, and I find it really interesting because I combine these a lot myself. Would it be okay to do find it on the 3 to keep them distracted, or just better to have them focus on you?
It totally can. And I often, when I am dropping a treat, it's often 1, 2, 3, find. And I do a lot of trail running with a very, very reactive dog, and often single track trail where I'm trying to pass other people, and I'm running, and my dog can do it very, very quickly. And if we lose the treat, then it's just find, and she immediately knows to start looking for it. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I've used it where I use the 1, 2, 3 to get by something.
Absolutely.
And then once I'm by it, I'm doing a 1, 2, 3 find, and I give them more time to just search and sense. Yeah. It's almost like a reward for doing the 1, 2, 3 pattern with me.
Absolutely. And we also, so one of the things that Leslie teaches is, and this is relatively new, it's not in the most recent book. She calls it latte, which is look at that, then enrichment. And so we know that treat scatters and sniffing help to decrease cortisol levels, make our dogs feel better. So just like Kate does, I will often build in 1, 2, 3, and then it's a treat scatter. Or look at that, you've looked several times, and then it's a treat scatter. And it just gives the dog a place to go, okay, yeah, I'm okay. And then they're past whatever it is that was scary that they had to get past, whatever they were concerned about. The last one that I want to talk about briefly, although I think we'll get into it in a couple minutes, is the up-down game. And this is another game where I'm putting my dog in control, just like the look at that. And this is a game that I use when I can't get out of a place. I can't 1, 2, 3. I'm stuck somewhere. I have people coming right at me, right? There's somebody coming through that gate, through that door, and there's somebody coming behind me, and what the heck do I do? And this game can kind of get my dog into me and get them focused on me and give them a pattern where they're not thinking about the other things that are around them. This is called the up-down game because all the dog has to do is eat a cookie, look up at you, eat a cookie, look up at you repetitively. I'm looking for a chicken head bobbing scenario where they're just down, up, down, up, down, up. And what the dog is basically doing with this game is by looking at you, it's them saying, hey, person, feed me. And I'm like, yes, I will feed you. And then they look up at me again and I say, hey, and they say, hey, feed me. And I'll do it again. So this game in its essence, I have my treats. I put a treat down between my dog's front feet. I don't care what position the dog is in. Let them eat the treat. The second they look up at me, I mark with yes and I drop another treat. Once they understand this, and if they're a quick eater, depends on how quickly they eat, I can get this going pretty rapidly. And often this can be enough to get my dog off to the side so that whatever the distraction is can move past me. So I use all three of these in conjunction based on my needs.
Yeah, and that's what I do. I mix and match based on
Yeah,
the dog, what
yeah.
the dog likes, what's easy for the owner. I just pick and choose.
Exactly. And dog training is an art and a science. So it is figuring out, okay, what can this owner do and what can this dog handle? I may be in an up down and all of a sudden my dog notices something and then I'm doing a look at that for a couple seconds and then we go right back into up down. And then I'm ready to move and we go into 1, 2, 3 as we're moving, and then maybe my dog notices and I play look at that for a second.
Yeah,
It's
no.
very, very fluid.
And as Lindsay's saying, she's bringing in the ping pong, and ping pong is really just another
It's up,
extension
down, side to
version
side. Yeah.
up and down. Yep. So it's
Robert
a
Foley
great
has
way.
a great question, Megan. When you have a clicker, can you do a 1, 2, 3 click?
No, you could, I suppose, but there is no clickable moment with the 1, 2, 3 game. So it is just a pattern that my dog can rely on. And so I am not clicking a specific behavior. Now I could, if I was clicking my look at that, I could be counting 1, 2, 3 and paying on 3. And then when my dog looks away, I could click the look away and mark that, but I wouldn't click in and of itself on the 1, 2, 3 pattern because there's no real markable behavior. It's just move with me through time and space and eat cookies.
But you could click kind of like we're doing the find it, which is a great question.
I totally
you
could click that.
in,
Yes.
right? So if I use my 1, 2, 3 to get past the stimulus, I would click once I'm past it. Here's your big reward.
Exactly. Exactly. But I wouldn't walk and 1, 2, 3 click, 1, 2, 3 click. I wouldn't do that.
This is a great question. Though.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
Anything you wanted to add in there, Linda?
No, I like that game. We've done something similar to the 1, 2, 3. The 1, 2, 3 find it here. And a lot of times we will use, my favorite thing is, we call it the jackpot or the treat toss afterwards, that instead of just one treat, they get a whole jackpot, especially if it's a dog that already has a history. And so they've done it, and we're really trying to reward that behavior. We made it past all these guys and you didn't react. Here, look here, great. And we've discovered that we also have some ways in kennel for dogs that are reactive, which isn't necessarily leash reactivity. So I won't go into that, but we do some things with them there too. So
I think we greatly underestimate the power of a treat scatter. It makes such a difference for our dogs. It really calms their brains down. It really puts them in a different mode. And we tend to not want to give, like, I don't want to give 10 treats, but let cookies rain from the sky. I'm trying to make my dog feel better.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I like that. Okay, let's move on to the emergency U-turns impulse control next. We do have a question that I want to get to when we're done with this slide, but let's.
Yeah, I'll
this
just
one.
do these real fast. Emergency U-turns is exactly what it sounds like, just teaching your dog on a cue word to turn completely 180 degrees, right? So you're walking the opposite direction. I taught this to my Chessie. It's very simple. It's just walking along, taking a treat lure at their mouth, having them follow the treat lure around you as you turn, and rewarding once you're headed back the other direction. And then you're pairing a cue word to that. And once dogs know that, you can start to actually increase the speed. So for my Chesapeake, it was let's go. And we could be walking along, and if somebody pops out unexpectedly, it was a let's go, and she would whip around and we'd head the other direction, right? And it's really just, it's a way to avoid that confrontation if you're not prepared, if you're not ready for it, and if we don't want our dog to continue to practice with those behaviors, right? And I think that's something that could be easily taught to dogs in a rescue and to volunteers and used if they end up in a situation where they need to use it.
We always recommend teaching it before you really need it. That's
Yes.
the key. Don't wait until the dog's reacting and say, I'm going to teach the emergency turn. So to teach it before the object of whatever the arousal is there. And so we start with a lot of our dogs here. Our dog walkers are already practicing it because they've learned the value of it.
Yeah, and what's funny too is some dogs, everything's very individualized with the owners and the dogs, right? Some dogs want to see things. I find other dogs don't. They don't want to see what it is. They want to leave, right? That makes them happier. Those are the dogs where, BAT, behavioral adjustment therapy, works great with, right? But emergency U-turn, some of these dogs actually learn, like what happens is eventually the trigger or the person becomes the cue or the precursor to what's about to happen. And the dog will turn around on their own. They don't want to see them. And they make the choice to just go the other direction. It's better. It's less stressful for them. And so that's a really nice way to use it. Impulse control exercises. I did bring this up briefly before. A lot of, and I'm sure Linda can attest to this, right? I think about everything from the brain when I'm talking about dogs and training. And if I'm working with dogs that are reactive, I know they're generally roused and that brain is working at a higher level of arousal. Any impulse control exercises, I can use simple things, sit, tug with the give and the take, right? Or drop it, weights at doors, anything like that helps my dog work more from a thinking brain perspective is going to help counteract and work against that arousal brain. And so that's helping control that arousal a little bit, right? Limiting it going up, 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 up. Instead, I'm trying to bring it down. And so exercises like that are super simple. And also, I'm sure you guys implement a lot of that stuff too, Linda.
Yes, definitely. That's, in fact, we call it our auto sit. That is our biggest thrill in life, is when we get a dog that bounces or does things, and instead they'll jump and then they'll turn and they'll sit, and they just sit and look at you like, I'm sitting. I'd rather have a dog. Everyone's like, but you didn't tell him to sit. I don't care. He's decided that's his default behavior, is sitting, and that's what we want,
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's great. All right, moving right along, because I know we're going to run over. So
Well,
keep in mind, you guys. Oh, Lisa's going to jump. She's going to say something. Oh,
we have a couple questions before we move on, and I'm going to ask the questions, and then we can answer them now, or it might be better to answer them as we go, but I want to get them out. And then, yes, we probably will go over time, and so people can hang around if they'd like. We won't get kicked out or anything, and this is a great conversation. So one is we have a leash reactive foster driven by frustration who does perfectly fine with our 2 large resident dogs. This isn't our first reactive foster, but definitely the most difficult. We'll be trying 1, 2, 3. Yeah, a lot of good feedback on 1, 2, 3, Megan. Thank you. How do you suggest M&Gs with adopters with other pets, or do we just say she needs to be the only animal in the house? And I don't know what the M&Gs is, but.
Is that management?
Meet and greets. Thank you.
Ah.
I'm sitting here reading this and I can't get it. It's too late at night here, guys. I'm tired. All right. Meet and greets with adopters with other pets, or do you just say that the dog should be the only animal in the house?
That's hard. Linda can probably speak to it better than me. I personally feel like there are certain dogs who will do best in the only dog house, but there are other dogs that I think, if set up appropriately, will do okay with another dog, not multiple dogs, not a friends, right? Not a big party, but 1 or 2 dogs in the house. I don't know. Linda, what are your thoughts on that?
We sort of specify on some of our dogs whether they should be the only dog in the house, the only animal in the house. And then we also guide people into how to properly introduce dogs, because what we see sometimes is that people walk in the house and, look, here's your new housemate, and they turn them loose, and then they're surprised when the dogs are growling at each other, or the dog is returned the next morning because he didn't get along with theirs. And we know from having this dog here that he's not reactive necessarily towards other dogs, but when you put them in close quarters in a new home, you could be asking for trouble. And yes, there are dogs that we recommend no other dogs. There are other dogs we recommend no small dogs, no cats. I mean, I think it's more a matter of learning the dog itself while it's residing in your facility or in your foster home with when making these recommendations, because when we get rescues in, a lot of times they've been around all sorts of other dogs, but when we get them in, we see they're just like people, and they have favorites that they like, and then they have others they don't. one of the behaviorists once told me, you know, you're not friends with everybody in the world. Why do you expect your dog to be? You know, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. So, you know, that's why I always tell people, you know, it may work out, it may not, but here's how you should start doing it. And we're aware that some of our dogs will not do well in homes with other animals, and we make those only animals or no other animals in the house. You know, just like we do sometimes with no small children, things like that, just because we've learned from walking this dog daily on, he may not bark and lunge at the other animals, but he may show some of those little key body language triggers that, oh, you know what, if I took him over there, we might have a problem because we're far enough away that he's not feeling the need to demonstrate something. So we do that. We do have animals in our shelter right now that are only dogs, no other dogs in the house. And we have others that we say okay with other dogs if carefully introduced. And then we provide them with guidance on how to do the introductions properly and just hope that the adopters follow through on it.
So it sounds like for this specific question, because I think what's interesting with this one is that the dog does do well with the 2 large resident dogs. So it's possible this dog will be okay. But if they was an adopter who wanted to take this dog, and it sounds like from some of the feedback we're getting in chat and what you guys are saying is they would need to do a meet and greet correctly with any other dogs that are in the house, probably one other dog. It doesn't sound like we'd want to send this to a home with a ton of dogs, but if they did have another dog, with a proper meet and greet, supervised and showing no potential issues, that maybe it could go to a home that has another dog. But I liked Lindsay's point, which is it depends on how much more difficult it will make the home integration and how many other issues they might be dealing with, which I think is, again, it's probably possible, but it raises a lot of concerns. So you're probably right to say, let's try to be the only animal in the house to avoid that. Does that sound right, Kate?
Yeah, I'm reading the chat discussion, which is great,
Yeah.
between Tracy and Lindsay and Ben. There's a whole bunch of good stuff here. Yeah, I think, you know, so much of it just comes down to the individual dog and also the home setting. And we need to take into that 3-3-3 rule, right? Like we just got a dog 6 months ago, fine in the kennel environment we brought her home from, surrounded by multiple small dogs. And within an hour of being in our house, and we did a neutral ground meet and greet, and we went walking with our little dog, within an hour, she was trying to eat him, right? So you can even set it up correctly, right? Having the knowledge base and having that history and just not knowing. But looking back now, I think probably just a new house, new toys, novelty, not knowing what's going on inside versus outside. I don't know the run. I don't know these people. You know, there was a lot of things that exacerbated her level of stress that first 24 hours. And we ran into a problem.
And
All right,
sometimes,
hopefully that answered your question, Elizabeth. And so again, we are just hitting our time. So let's keep going and see if we can't get through a little bit more.
And some of these we've already discussed too. So hopefully it will go a little faster. And Linda, I think Lisa didn't hear you there. So if you had something you wanted to add real fast.
oh,
Please.
I was just going to say, also keep in mind the resident dog helps dictate sometimes what the interactions are. And sometimes the resident dog doesn't necessarily want to share his house with somebody else. And even the nicest resident dog may not. So that was all I was going to add.
Thank you, Linda. I apologize if I cut you off. And you were literally just talking about my boxer who does not like the new puppy, but she's tolerating the new puppy. So I hear you. Okay.
All right. So we've talked about a bunch of different ideas inside the rescue. Let's talk about, and some of these are going to transfer over, some more ideas to help these dogs off-site, right? So leaving the rescue. What are some things we can do to help with that transition of going into the home to help owners, right? So if we look at our prevention here first, which is going to be our next slide, and Linda already talked about this a bunch, right? Is really working to match the dog with the adopters, right? So if we already know that this dog is not going to be good in a home with multiple dogs, and or cats, or needs an avid runner like Megan, right? Putting them in an apartment with 2 cats and a person who doesn't get out in the outdoors very much and works 8 hours a day is probably not ideal. And I would imagine on some level, and I haven't been in the rescue environment for years, but this is probably challenging, right? Because you're trying to find these animals homes and you may not always get the perfect home. But I do think working to match adopters as much as possible is a big one. And that also probably comes down a lot to the education. Linda, if you want to chime in here, please do.
The only thing I was going to say is at one point we used to ask specific questions. Now we have sort of open-ended adoption interviews where we put an open-ended question out there and get the feedback from the adopter to help us make that decision. Instead of saying, okay, you know, you have this, your schedule is this, it's not going to work, you're single, it's not going to work. Instead, we sort of phrase it like, okay, so you work. What do you intend to do with the dog while you're working? And what happens when you get home? And then we leave it up to them. And that really helps us. Sometimes people, as you talk to them, realize, ooh, maybe this isn't the right animal for me. And that always makes you happy because you don't have to say, you know, this isn't the right animal for you. Themselves. So that's one of the things we've sort of developed with our interviews now, is that we sort of ask open-ended questions. We do education. Sometimes there are ones that we think this is never going to work. And then we talk to the people and we educate them on topics. And we're like, well, you know what, maybe this will work. And we always try and get a follow-up from the adopters, you know, if you have problems or if it works, you know, let us know how it went so that we can know if we're on the right track or not. In all my years here, I've seen things go sideways that you thought would really be a fantastic matchup. And you're like, that didn't work out the way I planned it, you know. So it's the same way in the reverse too, where you may think this just doesn't sound like a good match, and you're amazed because you have the right adopter with the right attitude, and they're willing to meet the dog where it's at and work towards that and provide what the animal needs. And that's just half the battle with these guys.
I love that. I love the open-ended questions. Because I think you're right. It helps people to really vocalize what they need to do. And that can often help them understand better, right? Instead of just saying, what are your working hours, right?
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think too, and this is one we already talked about, you know, is knowing what already works with that dog, right? Giving those owners a rundown of the dog's routine. What do they like for enrichment? What do they enjoy to do? What kind of dogs do they like to play with? We don't think a lot about that. What's the dog's schedule? Those are things that can help that transition go better, in my opinion. I mean, I will coach people on that even when they've gotten a new dog, you know, asking rescues that if they're going to get one, or even a brand new puppy. And, you know, when we talk about focusing on the bond, a lot of this, I think, comes down to is giving those owners some reprieve, right? Letting them know that they need to just bond with their dog, spend some time with them, getting to know them. They don't need to worry about taking them on a hike right now and going down to the local eatery and meeting a bunch of people. You know, determine where your walks are going to be. Walk at low traffic times to start. Don't focus on the people, focus on the dog, get to know them. Let's not meet other dogs and people right now. Let's just work with each other. Let's learn some cues and some skills. And I know I saw somebody put in there, you know, having an opportunity, training options for them. Yes, resources. Here you go. These people can help you. GoodPup can help you, right? But having stuff available for those owners to take home with right then and there to prevent the behaviors from developing that we're not wanting or that we've seen may be at risk to develop. So, I'm just looking to see if anybody has any.
No, I don't think there's any questions. There is one that I will mention since I think it kind of relates to this. Someone had asked a little bit earlier, best ways to prevent leash reactivity from developing when fostering young dogs. And then they said proper socialization ? And best forms of that. So I think in terms of this question, I think fostering or adopting out young dogs, is there tools or things that you can tell adopters or fosters to prevent the behavior from ever developing? And is that tool socialization?
So first we have to define what socialization is before we can answer that, because so many people is laughing. So many people think
Kate, you're cut.
socialization is something we do at least from when you get them, 8 weeks, 7 weeks, until 14.
Kate cut out there, so I'm stopping her video because that sometimes helps. Kate, are you there?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
And our skies are clear tonight. Let Megan jump in on this until my internet comes back, because I'm sure she's going to answer it the way I was.
So definitely socialization is an issue, but I think most of us socialize, or many people socialize dogs completely incorrectly. My goal with any dog, whether it's a new puppy or a young dog, is to have a dog that is focused on me and isn't interested in its environment. So paying attention to my dog's body language, being very, very mindful in how I socialize. And socializing doesn't mean taking them to a park or to PetSmart. It can mean introducing a vacuum cleaner in my own home and different things that my dogs might not have ever seen. But at its core, with any dog, I'm going to start the same principles that I would with a reactive dog. I teach all of my dogs the look at that game. I teach all of my dogs 1, 2, 3. I teach all of my dogs up and down, because it gives me the tool to be able to help my dog deal with anything that they see in their environment, even if they're not full-blown reacting to what it is in the environment. So I want my puppy, even if they're not reactive, I want my puppy, if they see something novel, to point it out, and for me to be able to pay them for pointing it out and to help them move comfortably through time and space. So I treat all my dogs basically the same, whether they're reactive or not. Kate, are you back?
I don't know. You guys are still kind of fading in and out. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say socialization is different than exposure. And I love what you had to say too, Megan, that you kind of applied to everybody. But when I get a 6-month-old dog, I'm going to approach it a little differently than a 14-week-old, because I'm no longer in a window of socialization. I'm exposing, and that's where Megan was coming from, is giving my dog some skills to help them deal with and address stress. And I think the biggest thing is being proactive about it, getting in front of it, going out prepared with treats, with cues, with the knowledge that my dog might not be ready to walk downtown. Maybe we just need to sit over here and watch people go by as they go into downtown. And for me at least, it's that part of it more than anything else, is recognizing where your dog's at in the learning process and how to be proactive about it in order to prevent the potential risk of some reactivity on the leash.
Yeah, there's no downside to training them that stuff, right, Megan? Megan,
No.
you might as well do it to be ready, prepared.
Exactly. And it gives me tools, right? It's like the emergency U-turn. I want to train it before I need it, so that when I need it, it's already there. And I have 1 reactive dog. I have 3 dogs that are not reactive. I use the same tools with all of them, just because sometimes it's hard to walk past other people on the sidewalk. One of my dogs, it's because she loves everybody and wants to meet everybody. And so it's like, no, we're going to 1, 2, 3, because I don't want to say hi to anybody today.
Awesome. This is perfect. I'm going to move on to the next slide, because I think we've answered all the questions so far.
And we've talked about a lot of this already, these same things that used in the rescue, outside of the rescue, the appropriate walking equipment, the right person walking the dog, establishing a path that you're going to use every day, the same path. And this is huge, because for everybody, right? Everybody lives different places, cities. I live in the rural hills, which is why my internet may go out again here in a minute. But if you know the path you're walking your dog, if it's the same one all the time, your dog gets to know it. And that also helps set you up for success if you have a reactive dog, because you can learn areas along the path that give you an opportunity to provide some amount of visual barrier, distance from stimulus. So for the hills up here, they're 1-lane roads, right? And I teach my clients to know the driveways that go off the 1-lane roads. So if they come up, if they're approaching someone, if they run into a stimulus, they actually do a U-turn and back up to the last known driveway and go up the driveway to get the distance, right? And the same thing can be thought about for cities, right? Where is the dumpster kept? What truck is always parked here? What alley is around the corner, right? Knowing those ways to try to avoid the issue while we're getting to know that dog until we can teach them some skills. And that's also really important, I think, for elimination areas. I'm sure you guys see this, but I know one of the big things we get at GoodPup is these dogs that are scared to go outside of apartments to use the bathroom. And one of the ways we coach them through that is with pattern games that Megan had said, specific low traffic times, and establishing that specific area and path to the area so we can get them there and back.
It also makes sure that you don't step in their poop like I did the other day because it wasn't in the established area.
Well, I don't think inside the house counts.
Well, that too. Yes. Thank you, Kate.
And then of course too, again, you know, we also brought up medication as well. Certainly if we are going to help a dog and there's going to be added stress, so more trigger stacking with that adjustment time, with that transition, you know, having a medication may become even more relevant as well to use with them. Ladies, anything you guys want to add to that?
I think we've covered a lot of it, and yes.
Excellent.
All right, so let's talk about the last fun part, which is our offsite training, which I'm going to turn back over to Megan. She's already talked about a lot of the same things you're going to use in the rescue. We're going to use outside of the rescue, but there are some simple things too that we can just teach owners right away.
So I pretty much covered a lot of that. One of the others that I add in addition to the emergency recall or the emergency U-turn, is a whiplash turn. So teaching dogs just to reorient. I think it's really giving the handlers the skills and showing them that they can actually do it. It's something that I use a lot in GoodPup teaching, and I think a lot of the other GoodPup trainers do as well. But helping the new owners understand how to move their dogs, even if it's just, you know, giving them handouts on some of the games and demonstrating it to them.
I find too, it's, and Linda touched on this a bit, fosters, adopters feel like they are failures sometimes when they get these dogs and they can't work with them and they don't know what to do. And so for me, you know, taking the responsibility of walking the dog off the table is first, but also just being able to empathize with them and say, it's okay. It's okay. It's the dog, and we're going to work to understand them and advocate for them and help you find a way to communicate with them effectively. And that I think is really invaluable. Sometimes just listening and being there as a support.
It really helps sometimes too if you can say, you know, I have a reactive dog too, or I lived with a reactive dog too. I understand what you're feeling because I have felt it myself.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, that just takes that weight off their shoulders. They're like, she knows what she's doing and she's even dealt with the problem, you know? So I find that for me, and of course, I think probably most of us here have at one time or another had the reactive dog that we've learned to live with, learned to work with. And it just really gives people some confidence too. Well, maybe she does know what she's talking about. So.
Linda, this morning I was talking to Kate, and we've already mentioned I've just recently got a puppy, and I think about training all the time as co-founder of this company. And yet the first weekend, Kate, how many times did I call you? Like a lot, right? Because I was like, I'm doing this all wrong. Like you're just it's like new parent guilt and stress. And so, you know, I know from, and Megan, you can tell too, a lot of the people that come to GoodPup, it's not even tactical skills you're covering in that first session. You're just saying like, it's okay, right? Like we're gonna work this out, right? It's an emotional support, which is so necessary because people can feel so, even if they're the doing everything right, dogs they're unique. And so that empathy is something that I know our trainers provide a lot of, and a lot of trainers do and Kate provided it all weekend 2 weeks ago, which is not in her job description, but she did do it, which was great.
I mean, this is hard. I think people don't realize how hard it is, even with a completely normal puppy that has no issues, but you add in a rescue that's reactive and it's really, really challenging. I think my GoodPup role is as much therapist as it is dog trainer.
It can feel that way.
I think training in general, and Ben brought up a good point too, that it's not, it really shouldn't be thought of as failing, right? It's challenging.
Yeah.
And they've got a brand new member of the family they don't know how to communicate with. And I do know that one of the things I have used to help owners understand the dog is to say, how are you feeling right now? What are you going through? Where are your emotions? Are you at a breaking point? You're so overwhelmed. That's what your dog feels when they're on a leash. And sometimes just being able to put that out there for the owner and them go, oh, right. It helps them understand why they can't get through to the dog and why it's not changing right away. And it's sometimes can be a nice starting point as well.
That's great.
That
really
conversation.
Good. I'm going to answer Joan's question, which is yes, there will be a copy of the PowerPoint along with the recording posted on our webinar site, which I'll share with everyone that enrolled. So I will be presenting that as well. And then Kate, do you see the question above that?
I'm in the chat. Is it in the question and answer or the chat?
It's in the chat, so I'll read it. Tracy said,
I was trying to read through it, but I was struggling.
It's okay. No, I think the scenario that she's brought up is that she has a dog that barks, that loves
to go on her scheduled walk.
To go on her scheduled walk. So she goes up to her harness and barks, but continuously barks once it's on, barks in the yard, barks as they're starting their walk, no stimuli around, but she's just uppity for a good quarter of a mile. And then it's stimuli along the way. And she was the one to instigate the walk.
I think initially it's like an attention seeking behavior. Like she wants to do what she wants to do and it's being reinforced with the walk. And she's probably quite conflicted if she's also having some reactivity when she gets on the walk. Like she wants to go, she likes to have a good time, but then there's a thing over there and I don't know what to do with it. And conflict is an emotion. It's like anything else. So we start at the groundwork with trying to get in front of the conflict. And so maybe the walk needs to be, we put the harness on, and you two jump in on this, but this would be how I might start this. We put the harness on, we go outside for a short walk, maybe 50 yards, maybe 100 yards, do a little bit of training, play a pattern game, and then we go back inside. So that I'm not ending up on the walk with an aroused dog who's now conflicted because she's seen the stimulus and I've just exacerbated the intensity of the emotion. Megan, Linda, you guys feel free to jump in.
I totally agree with that. And I'd probably be spending a lot of time working on, can we just put the harness on with calmness? Right. Can we just condition, can you come and get the harness on? And then when we can do that, like I wouldn't be walking this dog at all initially. And then I would be working on, can we do training in the backyard with the harness on? Can we go out into the front yard and do a pattern game to the mailbox and back? And working on keeping her below threshold the entire time. I think for this dog, it's a little bit like a drug and she wants that hit of adrenaline and she craves it, but it's not doing her any good. And she's just, cortisol levels are really, really high with her. So I'd be working on calm. I'd be doing a lot of chin rests. I'd be really focusing on, we only move forward if our mental state is there.
Here in the shelter, we get a lot of dogs that are that way when they see the leash.
Yeah.
Volunteer comes to the kennel with the leash and the dog erupts. It's so excited. So we've gotten to where for some of these dogs, we actually go in front of the kennel with the leash, just drop a couple treats, walk away, come back, then we'll go inside the kennel, but we won't put the leash on the dog. And we just do this until the dog says, well, gosh, you're no fun. There's the leash, but I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And start changing that emotional response to the leash so that we can then start handling them easier. Because that is our biggest issue is the volunteers predict a walk. The
Mhm.
volunteers with a leash definitely predict a walk. And so we're working with them to try and sort of change that emotional state.
Yeah, from the ground. And once you've got a calmer dog in that shorter distance of 50 yards, then you can start to add more distance. So,
Awesome.
yeah, great question.
Yeah, I'll just want to add real quick, of course. When people first get these dogs, before they even take them in a walk, what I sort of suggest is you figure out what route you're going to walk, and you actually walk it without the dog first to see what is around you, because in our area, we live by a park and everybody has big dogs in their yard that will come running up to the side of the fence barking. And so this way you sort of can anticipate what you're going to run into before you have the dog at your side, and you can start making plans that way. I do recommend that to people, especially people that have dogs that are, we call them our little rowdy dogs, things like that, so that they know what they're going to encounter on their walk. And they can make their plans, like you said, can I cross the street? Are there bushes or shrubs on this side? We've had people even use like parking meters and things like that just to try and block access. So that's one of the things we recommend here too with these guys.
Yeah, and that is kind of the last thing too. I said here, if you have identified triggers, if you know some of the dog's triggers, sending them out the door with the owners already knowing, if you see this, avoid it until you get to know the dog and we can build a plan, or you can build a plan, is very helpful.
Excellent. All right, let's move into what not to do to address leash reactivity. And Kate?
This could be an entire webinar in and of itself, Lisa.
I know, I know I have to keep you on task.
Hey, I've been trying very hard. We've already talked about a lot of these things, right? But I think certainly over the years, many go-tos have been punishment-based techniques, aversive techniques to remove those reactive behaviors on the leash. I mean, we've got a lovely picture of a prong collar here. The downside to using aversives is that they also cause unpleasant feelings and experiences, anything from physical harm to emotional harm with the dog. And so they're really unnecessary and potentially dangerous and tend to create a bigger problem. So I've just kind of talked about some big points here that we can run through real fast as we wrap up. But, it really could be anything, because aversives are different for every dog. So you've got to think about this. Spray bottles, a lot of us don't think about that, but that's an aversive. And for many dogs, that can be quite harmful mentally for them. Prong collars, chokers, electronic collars, the penny cans. And I've had many people say, oh, I use this interrupter, and they shake the can. That's an aversive. It's a audio aversive. So we want to try to avoid those. Many of these, like this prong collar, they can be physically harmful for the dog. I mean, you can actually cause damage to your dog pulling on the end of the leash if we don't know how to correctly use them. The other thing we run into a lot is, Megan brought this up earlier. So punishment in and of itself is there to remove the behavior, right? So we're adding something the dog doesn't like, something aversive, so that we decrease the behavior we're seeing. But what's the behavior from? Behavior is due to an emotion. So while I may remove the behavior, may is a key word here, with my aversive, if it's harsh enough and I stop that, have I addressed the emotion? I haven't. So now I have this dog who's still in a constant state of stress, and I've not taught them what they can do differently to help themselves, which can end up with the dog in learned helplessness. So now my dog doesn't know what to do or how to communicate, and they feel like the world is over and ending. And that's certainly the last thing I want for my dog on a leash. And certainly not going to help me have a pleasant experience or do it again. And then the other big problem we run into with punishment is the punishment, the sensation that they feel, whether it's an electronic shock or it's water sprayed at them, or the pressure of the collar on them, can be paired to anything happening around the dog, not just that stimulus. It could be paired to a brand new stimulus. It could be paired to the owner on the other end of the leash. And now I'm breaking down my bond if I had one to begin with, right? So we really want to lean away from aversives. We don't want to use them in any situation, but most importantly, not in a situation where we have emotions as our primary concern for the behaviors we're getting on the leash. And I'll let Megan and Melinda build on that.
It's such a hard one. It really,
right?
It breaks my heart, but it also just, some of the worst dog bites I've ever seen have been from dogs that had all of their ability to communicate with us removed. And it worries me on such an intense level. And what we forget with reactive dogs and with dogs in general is they don't have many ways to communicate. And when they are having a hard time and they're barking or they're reacting to something, they're giving us information. And when we suppress that information, bad things happen. Very, very bad things happen. And so it's really, I want dog-led training, and I want my dog to be able to communicate when they're having a hard time so that I can help them. And I think that is at its core of why I'm not willing to use these types of tools.
Well, I think a lot of owners think they are punishing the behavior, and instead what they're really doing is punishing the dog.
Yeah.
And they're taking that ability for the dog to give his emotion, let you see and communicate his emotional feelings with you. So he looks for another outlet or another way that's acceptable. We've had dogs come in that have been corrected for growling or for things like that. And so now what we have sometimes our staff says, he doesn't even give you any warning. He just tries to bite you. And then we find out where they've come from or what the situation was. And he was corrected for doing all those things. So when he reaches that point on his threshold where he has to do something or he feels really threatened, his reaction is to strike out. And yes, it's the owners or whoever's working with him at that time that sometimes pays the price for that if they're not really watching the dog, because they're used to dogs growling before they bite maybe, or showing their teeth or doing some of these things. And if you've taken all those communications away from him, he's just going to act out on what he knows works. And that's sort of what we find here. We have dogs that are just really, they're a little bit, I call them the spooky dogs, because they don't necessarily give all the warnings you anticipate because they've been taught not to. We dealt with fighting dogs, and that was the way with them too, is fighting dogs are taught most of the time they never growl before they attack. They're very silent, and they've been taught. I mean, that's how they've been taught. And some of these other dogs that come in are the same way. And owners think they're doing right. I'm going to stop him from doing that. And instead, what happens is they create more of a problem.
Right. Because the emotion doesn't go away.
No.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We have a question in the Q&A. I believe even without tools, corrections can be too harsh. Do you guys follow a Lima type of progression?
Yeah, we do. And what's interesting, actually, we went to a webinar a couple months on this ago about Lima, least invasive, minimally aversive, right? And it's a lot of people actually misinterpret this progression. It's a very individual for each dog, and it's very specific to what you're working on. It's not generalized. And you're really, if you're walking down that path, you have to slowly move into what is the least invasive, minimally aversive. What's the least amount that you can use? And that's where you stop. And I think some people, the webinar I went to, they see it, interpret it more as a tool of, well, if positive reinforcement doesn't work and negative reinforcement and negative punishment aren't working, then I can go to punishment. But that's not really how we interpret it. And so that's when we train our trainers, that's how we train them. That one, it's a path we progress down, and it is the very least, most minimally, if we get there, and it's the very last resort if we get there.
For
So
some
that's
dogs, I was just going to say, for some dogs, I had a collie that if I raised my voice at her, she shut down immediately. She was so sensitive. And for her, that was, I just learned very quickly. We did rally with her once, and we were trying to do a walking down. And I walked and I said, down. And she looked at me like, are you yelling at me? And I realized, and I could hear my trainer on the sidelines going, happy voice, And so we tried it again, and she went right down. And I'm like, yes, for her, it took me a long time to learn, but just raising my voice was enough to shut her down. Whereas my other dog, I probably could have screamed as loud as I wanted to, and he would have looked at me and said, are you talking to me?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where people run into problems with Lima, right? So many people, and not so many, there are people who unfortunately interpret it as a way to use punishment, and that is not how we interpret it at GoodPup.
Yes.
And I have to interject. I have to go. I have a GoodPup client, so I need to head out. It was great attending this, and bye, guys.
Thank you so much, Megan.
See you.
Okay, let's see.
I think we just have our last slide, which is essentially that we've gone over all kinds of various ideas to help rescues, shelters, our adopters, educate, prevent, manage, train. And really the biggest is just to remember that there's actually two ends to the leash. One is the owner and one is the dog. And that's really where we'll find success, when we can build a team that can communicate effectively.
Great point.
So, Linda, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
You made great points on all of this. This was really, I think it covered a subject. It's a subject that anyone that works with animals needs to know, and especially dogs needs to know, because it's a common problem.
100%. And I think this was super duper helpful. Sorry, I was just answering a few more questions, but I think this is great. I will end with thank you especially to Linda for joining us. This is such a treat to have a special guest. Kate, as always, thank you so much. And I'll just end with a little bit of information again about GoodPup. You can go to goodpup.com/shelters to check out all of the different programs we offer to our rescues, or you can email us at shelters@goodpup.com. I do want to highlight quickly what I mentioned earlier, which is we have just launched our scholarship program, which allows our rescue partners to send adopters or fosters home with 4 weeks of training paid for by the shelter, or we have other resources as well that can help with financing. And that way, you are sending the dog home with this tool that they can use, so they're not getting overwhelmed and you're not overwhelming your staff with lots of questions, etc. So please check us out and send us questions if you have interest in getting scholarships for your teams. And last but not least, again, this will be recorded and launched, and I will send an email out to everybody on Thursday with the webinar live, so you can download that, as well as the PowerPoint, so you can have that to take with you as well and share with your teams. And please mark your calendars for March 3rd. We will have our next webinar with another special guest. We will be covering the ABCs of compassion fatigue. We've heard from many shelters that you guys are understaffed and super stressed, and we want to be able to provide this awesome resource to you guys to learn ways to cope with that and to help your teams cope with that as well. So please come March 3rd, and we'll send more information about that. And I'm going to stop recording.